And I am here to say that everybody needs to stop blaming The Rock for Paul Levesque's shitty WrestleMania. Stop blaming The Rock for Paul Levesque's shitty WrestleMania. It's not his fault. There's a lot of fans calling him a liar and saying everything he said on McAfee was a load of shit. I don't know about that. The timeline seems to add up to me. Look at the timeline. There are reports going as far back as December 2024 from Dave Meltzer, who, by the way, nailed all of this in his reporting over the last 4 or 5 months. A lot of people owe him an apology. Had every detail correct. But there are reports going back to December, including from Meltzer, that The Rock was not going to be at WrestleMania this year. He wasn't there. So go through the timeline. We find out in December that there's no plans for him to be there. And by no plans for him to be there, that means he doesn't want to be there because he calls his shot. Let's not forget, he's Levesque's boss. Let's not lose sight of that. The Rock's on the board. Levesque's not on the board. The Rock is in that small inner circle of people who run TKO. And he's particularly the wrestling side. He's highly influential. We all know that. He does what he wants. He's known Nick Khan for years. As has been reported, Nick Khan will always side with Dwayne Johnson over Paul Levesque. And we've seen that play out over the last 2 years. As we found out today, when Ari Emanuel doesn't think things are going so hot, he calls up The Rock to come save Paul. So let's not lose sight of the fact that he's Levesque's boss. Okay, so the fact that we knew in December that The Rock wasn't going to be at WrestleMania or wasn't planning on being at WrestleMania, that was The Rock's call. January 6th, he shows up to the Raw debut on Netflix. And I think this is the most important piece of evidence that everything The Rock is saying is the truth. Because what did he do on the Raw debut on Netflix? He broke kayfabe. And he killed all of his storylines. Why? Because he thought he wasn't going to be at WrestleMania. He wasn't planning on being at WrestleMania. He was going to take the year off. So he wasn't concerned with keeping the flame burning on his feuds. Now, I would question that. It's not the path I would have chosen. But he's The Rock. He figures he can waltz back in around Royal Rumble time next year and reheat anything he needs to reheat. So he wanted to go out there on Netflix, out of character, cut a rah-rah promo, see you in a year. That was his mindset on January 6th. And by the content of his promo, that was very obvious. Now, if you recall, a lot of people, including us, we were confused. We're like, why would he burn every possible storyline bridge? What a dope. He faced massive criticism, and he was gotten to because he showed up at NXT the next day. Some say half in the bag, to complain about it. Clearly gotten to. It bothered him. And then he goes away. When does he show up next? Elimination Chamber. Why? Because as he says, Ari Emanuel called him and said, we need some help. This is why I believe The Rock. We're told in December he doesn't plan to be there. We know Meltzer's been close to Dwayne Johnson over the years. I don't know how close he is anymore. Dwayne's a busier guy than he was in 1998. But now with the benefit of hindsight, we see that all of Meltzer's reporting was correct. Meltzer's harshest critics today are saying Meltzer had it correct every step of the way. So we knew in December he didn't want to be there. Shows up in January, kills all his storylines because he figures he's not going to be. But then Ari gives him a call. Says, come save this show. Give us some ideas. Bring your mana. Now, an ego like Dwayne, he's happy to bring his mana. And he brings it to Elimination Chamber, brings those ideas to the table. What do we end up with? The Soul Story. Not really the right time for Cody to turn, so we're going to do it with Cena. Everyone's agreeable. And that's what we go with. It is touted as the greatest heel turn in wrestling history. It is touted as the greatest angle of all time. Right up there with Hulk Hogan joining the NWO. Near universal praise. Scratch that. Not even near. Universal praise. Effusive universal praise for the John Cena turn. And that's important. And a lot of people might want to be rewriting history this week. I'm not going to do that. We all know how effusively praised that angle was in real time. We were told it was the greatest angle in wrestling history. We were told it was the greatest turn in wrestling history. I think or a lot of us were shocked by it, even those that weren't. Saw that the angle came across very well. Cody took a vicious beaten with his own watch. Travis Scott working stiff, popping his eardrum. John Cena, he finally turned heel. It's a great angle. I thought it was a great angle. I said it was a great angle in real time. I still think it was a great angle. It was memorable. It was, dare I say, iconic. It'll be remembered forever. So the final boss's work was done, as Dwayne said on McAfee today. He sprinkled his mana on things. Injected some juice into a very, very dull WrestleMania build. And let's not rewrite that history either. What was the theme coming into WrestleMania this year? Cold build, doesn't feel hot, very uncreative. Nothing feels like it's on fire going into the show. Lots of changes along the way. Changes that wrestling media personalities talked about each step of the way and were told that they were lying and make things up. Now we have screenshots from that new Netflix documentary, The Making of WrestleMania or whatever they're calling it. And we see some of those matches that had been reported that ultimately didn't end up happening on a whiteboard in a screenshot from that documentary that hits soon. This was a big day for wrestling media being proved to be right. Whether it was Dave Meltzer and his reporting on The Rock and the main event of WrestleMania, whether it was friend of the show Ibu and a lot of the WrestleMania matches that he said were in the cards that didn't end up happening, being proven to have been discussed or tentatively on the books via that whiteboard. So let's not forget that this was considered a dull and dragging WrestleMania build. And really the only thing that felt hot was that angle. This was the second year in a row that The Rock interjected himself on a cold, dull Levesque WrestleMania build and added some juice. Is it chaotic? Yes. It was extremely chaotic last year. But it's a jolt, it's juice, it's excitement. It's the antithesis of what Levesque gives you, which is dull, boring, uninspired, repetitive, lazy. And let's not pretend we all didn't agree that this build wasn't so hot. We were saying that up until the day of the show. But this turn, the Cena angle, one of the greatest moments in the history of wrestling. Almost universally agreed upon. So look at that timeline. Then he claims that's when he made the phone calls to Cody and Cena and said, all right, I'm out. You guys are on your own. You're two enormous stars. You've got 6 weeks. Heat it up. I think he literally said that to McAfee. I told him you have 6 weeks. Heat it up. Get it cooking. Did Levesque cook? He most certainly did not. Did Cena cook? He most certainly did not. uninspired promos from Cena, weak material, and almost nothing resembling a build period, let alone a hot build, from the great creative mind of two-time Booker of the Year Paul Levesque. The Rock handed them a red-hot angle that had the wrestling world talking, and with each progressive week, it got cooler and cooler until it was essentially pretty cold on game day. The Rock handed them the ball at the 5-yard line, and they couldn't punch it in. And on 4th and goal on Sunday night, they had a bad match with a terrible, uninspiring, universally panned finish. And that's The Rock's fault? This is The Rock's fault. And people are basing that on the fact that The Rock wasn't there. Well, everybody knew The Rock wasn't going to be there. Dave Meltzer knew in December. And he tried to tell you. John Cena and Cody knew after Elimination Chamber that The Rock wasn't going to be there. Paul Levesque knew The Rock wasn't going to be there. They all knew. The Rock didn't leave them hanging. The timeline makes sense. The timeline adds up. The Rock didn't want to be there. He made that clear on January 6th. He killed all of his angles on January 6th. Was that the behavior of a man who planned on being at WrestleMania? Use your head. Use some logic. Stop reacting with emotion. And that's what's happening here. Emotions are taking over. People are mad. They're upset that WrestleMania was bad. That the main event of WrestleMania was bad. I have no emotions. I have no skin in the game. I don't watch this with any emotional connection. I don't give a shit about WWE. I'm clear-headed. I see that the timeline is sound. I see Levesque and Cena and Cody and the creative team that had 6 weeks to keep the momentum going from what was considered universally the greatest angle of all time, the greatest turn of all time, and they couldn't do it. This is The Rock's fault. How is it The Rock's fault that Levesque came up with that finish for that match? It's not. The guy wasn't even there. And he told them they wouldn't be there. It's not as if he told them he would be there and then pulled the football away like you know, the Peanuts gimmick. Lucy yanking the football away. No, they knew he wasn't going to be there. He called them after Elimination Chamber. And if he didn't, and he's full of shit, that's a bold thing to say to a national audience on the McAfee show when you have 2 people who can say, no, he didn't. In Cody and Cena. He called them. Don't think for a second he didn't call them. Can't buy this theory he's lying. His timeline makes sense. We got a paper trail and receipts going back to December that this man wasn't going to be at WrestleMania. So then the complaints shift to, well, the Cena turn would have made sense at WrestleMania. Frustrated. He can't beat Cody. He resorts to any means necessary to win that 17th title. And the turn would have been better if he turned at the WrestleMania show. Here's why I can't take that seriously. Here's why I emphasized that the turn at Elimination Chamber was universally praised as the greatest wrestling turn ever, the greatest wrestling angle ever. You can't talk out of both sides of your mouth on that. You can't have both of those stances. You can't tell me that that was the greatest angle and greatest turn of all time and then tell me that they should have done it at WrestleMania instead, and that they screwed this up, and they should have saved the turn for 6 weeks later. You don't get to do that. You don't get to do that just because Dwayne didn't show up. That's disingenuous. You can't spend 6 weeks talking about how great the first angle was and then tell me that they should have never done it. I'm not letting you get away with that. That you can't do. These same people who don't like The Rock and want him to go away and say they're sick of him sticking his beak in and he needs to retire and disappear. Those same people can't turn around and say that they're mad that he didn't show up at WrestleMania. Because again, which is it? You either want him there or you don't want him there. See, these people, they're not mad that the Cena turn happened 6 weeks early. They're not mad that The Rock didn't show up at WrestleMania. They're not mad at those things. Okay? They're mad that their precious WrestleMania sucked this year. And they're looking for a scapegoat. And that scapegoat cannot be their precious Paul Levesque. That's what's happening here. So they blame The Rock. It's all The Rock's fault. Shouldn't have done the turn in Elimination Chamber. Wait, I thought you loved the turn. He should have been there at WrestleMania. Wait, I thought you don't want him around. Last year, all I heard was, we don't want him around. After January 6th, all I heard was, we don't want him around. Which is why he went on NXT and complained that y'all said you didn't want him around. This week, all I'm hearing in the aftermath is, we don't want him around. He needs to go away. Well, it sure seems like you want him around. You're mad he wasn't there Sunday. So again, which is it? Pick a side. See, here's the thing. It's neither. It's you don't want to blame Levesque. These fans don't want to blame Levesque. They can't do that. They have too much stock in Levesque. Levesque saved the company. Bad man gone. But even if you hated the main event, and even if you hated the main event finish, and even if you want to blame it on The Rock, even if I grant you that, even if I allow you to do that, and say it's all The Rock's fault that the main event was a pile of shit, and the finish wasn't any good, it's all The Rock's fault. Even if I grant you that, explain to me what The Rock has to do with the rest of WrestleMania. With night one that was filled with poorly built, heatless, listless matches up and down the card until we got to the semi-main event, which was only hot because those two chose to shoot on each other. Nothing Levesque did. What does The Rock have to do with that? On a card that we all agreed was poorly built. I bring up these points for a reason. I set it up to knock it down. We all agreed the build stunk. What does The Rock have to do with that? At best, he had something to do with one match, and I'll grant you that one. I disagree with you, but I'll grant you that one. For the sake of this argument, what did he have to do with that terrible night one? How is that his fault? Whose fault is it? Whose fault is it that the matches on night one were poorly built and had no heat? Why didn't they have any heat? Because they were poorly built. Who's responsible for the build? It's not Dwayne Johnson. It's Paul Levesque. Who's responsible for a night two that fell apart after the first three matches? Where the biggest response after the first three bouts, and the one thing that everybody's talking about outside of the main event this week, is whether Joe Hendry, of all people, was buried or not. Who was responsible for that mess of a night? Was it The Rock? Or was it Paul Levesque? And by the way, Joe Hendry would have never been on the card to begin with if Kevin Owens hadn't gotten injured. So you can't even give Levesque credit for that one. And that's got people talking, but in all the wrong ways. Stop blaming The Rock for Paul Levesque's shitty WrestleMania. The guy can grandstand and take credit for everything and open up every show to get the first pop and give a 1 hour and 7-minute Hall of Fame acceptance speech. He can take a little medicine for the shitty WrestleMania that you got this weekend. Don't pass the buck to someone else because you didn't like one finish. Don't call Dwayne Johnson a liar when his timeline makes sense. Don't tell me something was the greatest thing you've ever seen and then 6 weeks later decide they shouldn't have done it. You're not going to get away with that here. Not here. You can't call the guy a liar when his timeline adds up. You can't blame him for the build when they knew he wasn't going to be there. You can't blame him for the finish when he had nothing to do with putting it together. If anything, you should be thanking him for injecting some juice into these terrible, dull, uninspiring WrestleMania builds, the likes of which we saw play out this weekend on two incredibly disappointing, mundane, and underwhelming shows. The fault of which lies entirely on the person who is the first one to stand up and take all of the credit for himself. And that's Paul Levesque.